Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Max Sugarman. I'm Chief Executive of Intelligent Transport Systems UK. We're the membership body for transport technology. And today's session is about sustainable streets, harnessing traffic modelling and management for decarbonisation. And we've got a really fantastic panel, but what I think I really want to highlight is how important this conversation is for everything that we're discussing in this room today around decarbonisation, also around things like air quality and general sustainability. Ultimately, if we can get more people to use greener forms of public transport, or to move to walking, cycling, scooting, or any forms of active travel, if we can make our road network and those who are the road users make that more efficient and effective, so that we aren't stuck in traffic emitting carbon dioxide and other gases, then that is even just as important. So getting our kind of the modelling, getting the management of traffic right is essential. We've got a really fantastic panel, as I said, so I'm going to just introduce them and then ask them to say a bit about what they do. So Anders Bengtsson, I think, is that
Why
right?
not? Good try.
A good try, yes. Bengtsson, thank you very much. Head of Innovation Hub North at EIT Urban Mobility. John Galsworthy, Director of Climate Change and Transport at Hammersmith and Fulham Council. Dr. Laurence Chittock, Associate at PTV Group. And Dr.
Line, is it?
Pardon? Oh, I think, is your mic working? I couldn't hear you there.
Let's be quiet. Yeah.
Hopefully that works. We might need to get that sorted.
Yeah.
But, oh, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Traditional microphone.
Do you want to just test that?
Yeah, I can.
Perfect. You're coming in
Good.
loud and clear.
Hello, everyone.
Good.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much. And finally, last but not least, Dr. Patrizia Franco, Lead Demand Modeller at Connected Places Catapult. So thank you all for joining. And if I could ask you just to introduce your organisations, a bit about what you do, and also give your kind of view on the topic as well. What do you see as the importance for traffic management and modelling for climate change and decarbonisation? Anders, I'll come to you first.
Thank you, and for having me here today. It's a real joy to be here. First of all, I'm a Swede, living in Denmark, and in Denmark, the Innovation Hub is an EAP.
Oh, I think you might need Anders a mic as well.
Also,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Luckily, we've got lots of space.
Okay, I do it again. Thank you for having me today, everyone. Good to be here with you. And I'm working as what is called as head of Innovation Hub. And Innovation Hub is one of 5 spots throughout Europe where EIT Urban Mobility is working from. And so we are covering, all of Europe, but in our case, it's the Nordic countries and the Baltic countries. And of course, we collaborate with all the, other hubs as well throughout Europe. But mainly, we do have a focus or even a mission that is saying that we want to speed up change towards sustainable mobility and more urban livable cities. And so that is something that comes through in everything that we do. I can say that is a lot of, I think we will touch upon it today. We do have some what we call high impact topics, and this year public transport is really one of those. And so we are actually putting also in place a special interest group on public transport, and that is something we are very focused on this year. Very briefly, and then I also have a background from working in the city of Lund in south of Sweden for many, many years with the city office there with the same questions. Thank you.
Fantastic, thanks, Anders. John, you're a bit more local in terms of where you've come from today.
Well, not where I live, but where I work, yes, definitely. Yeah. Just make life a bit easier. So I'm a civil engineer by background, so I've been working in transport and construction for probably since the late 80s. Give or take, I've seen plenty of stuff. So my area, we got kind of the departments. One's got looking after parking, so we look at actually how we manage the demand of vehicles coming to us through the policies in parking. We have the climate team, which is very much looking at how we reduce carbon across the borough per se, so especially focus on our own estate and our own buildings, retrofit strategy for that, and also helping the supply chain and the developers and everything getting into that position as well. So that's quite a busy team. And then we also have all the transport planning projects and policy side. So it's how we build our infrastructure for our priorities. So essentially, our transport priorities are pedestrians, cyclists, the public transport and emergency services. Then it's deliveries, and then private road car users right at the bottom. So whenever we're designing schemes, it's always in that kind of framework. So that's essentially what we do in a nutshell. And of course, I'm the interface between the teams that deliver the projects and the politicians above me. So it's interesting job.
Not an easy job, I can imagine. Laurence, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Max, and hi, everyone. It's Chittock. And first thing, is the mic still working? Yes.
Yes, just
Yes.
about.
Okay.
We'll stick with it.
Extremely well.
We'll get there in the end. Thanks for your patience. So, a little bit about my company, which is PTV Group. We're a software company, and we produce transport modelling software. Very quickly, what transport modelling is, it's a digital representation of the transport system. And this software is used across sort of our industry to plan and manage how our transport systems run. We're a global company, so we sell software around the world, but we're used quite a lot here in the UK with the likes of TfL, DFT, many of the big engineering consultancies. My background, I'm a bit of a techie sort of data geek, so I like digging into the numbers, and we run some lighthouse projects with our software, demonstrate what it can do, and so we've been working quite recently with Cambridgeshire, looking at how sort of some of the local issues can help deliver active travel schemes and new bus schemes there. And I also have a background in electric vehicle infrastructure modelling.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Thanks, Laurence. Patrizia, sorry.
Thanks, Max.
Over to you.
I'm a lead demand modeler at Connected Places Catapult. I'm specialized in agent-based and activity-based modeling. These are new type of models which are put the users at the it's not working again. So I looked at travel behavior, what people interest, and what are the activities across the 24 hours in order to integrate new mobility concepts with the public transport, and what are the new emerging trends in data in order to use them in transport models. A big focus of the Connected Places Catapult is research and innovation in order to remove barriers in the market and identify new type of products and services in transport, in mobility, for cities and for place leadership. My role is I'm a technical lead in projects, and I developed these huge methodologies that integrate transport models with digital twins in order to understand the decarbonization pathways for airports, ports, and in general for the entire transport system. But with look into the travel behavior and people's preference and what they would like to do in order to change their habits in order to achieve the decarbonization of the transport system.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I should just say that if you do want to ask a question, I think there is the QR code over there, and I've got Slido on my little iPad here, so there's already a question that's come in, but we'll come back to them. But as we're going, please do feel free to add in your questions and provide us your thoughts. So first and foremost, obviously we've got quite a rapidly changing transport sector in terms of decarbonisation of vehicles themselves, EV, hydrogen, battery, in terms of a whole range of different kind of ways of decarbonising the fleet. What do you see as traffic management's role amongst all of that, and in terms of our changing transport system? And also just thinking about how are we getting people to think more about decarbonisation and think more about the journeys they're making. John, you mentioned this a bit, so do you want to start off there if I come to you?
Complicated question first, yeah. Yeah, it's one of those, we got quite a good insight into how kind of traffic demand works on the roads during COVID. It's mainly because we got quite a large network of ANPR cameras around our network, and sort of about 300 local, hyperlocal air quality network as well, so we can see what's going on. And we could see during that period with the lockdowns, the actual traffic volumes dropped to about 20% of normal demand, which will give you roughly what the essential traffic for London is. So that was emergency services, sort of like logistics of food movement and all that sort of thing. So as the lockdowns come out, we could see the traffic going up as some of the more key services were coming back, and then it went through the roof and went to about 160% as people were avoiding public transport. So you could actually from that get a really good sense of who was doing mode shifts to car from was previously doing public transport before. So because we know that, there's quite a big chunk, 80% of the traffic is afloat really. So you can either try and get it to modally shift or choose not to take the journey. And some of that's down to how we deal with the capacity on the road network. So we've done 2 big clean air neighbourhood schemes. They're in the press. If you want to Google the ones in Hammersmith and Fulham, you'll see how much they're loved and hated as equal measure by various groups of people. But one thing it did demonstrate is that when you reduce the capacity of road network available to cars, and especially sat-navs, which is very, very key, then actually the amount of vehicles in an area drops dramatically. And because we've got all of the parking data and all of the NPR camera, the actual visitation of vehicles that come and service the businesses in those areas actually increased because there was less through traffic congestion on all the roads. So although they get a bad rap at times, actually it helped quite dramatically.
And Laurence, if I come to you next, traditionally, traffic management's focused on just literally getting traffic around a city centre, an urban centre, or another area. How do you see the industry changing in regards to how we're looking at decarbonisation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that has been the focus, and fortunately, moving traffic around more efficiently also correlates with reducing or at least minimising emissions. But a lot of the software and a lot of the tools, the measurements has been on congestion and reducing travel time and reducing delay. But the key measurement is on emissions and is on air quality. And we're seeing that come into the transport sector a lot more, is how actually does transport impact with air quality, localised air quality, and how through traffic management, whether that is giving priority through signals, how can that improve and minimise emissions. The other one is, as well, is sort of John pointed out, is that hierarchy and changing the focus of priority away from the car, maybe through to pedestrians and buses. And so we can also do that through traffic management.
Great, fantastic. And Patrizia, I'm going to come to you next. And I wanted to ask first your opinion on this, but also you have previously mentioned about kind of user behaviour as well and the importance of that. I just wondered where that fits in terms of traffic management and decarbonisation.
We now have quite a lot of data available on the travel behavior through ANPR, but also from app-generated data and proximity data through the mobile devices. With that in mind, we are able to push messages to users and changing their travel behavior, providing incentivization, or basically providing more information on their travel journey in order to provide better reliability. And in order to do that, they change the way they travel. They avoid when there is the congestion, when there is road closure, for example. This is a technique that, for example, National Highways is using quite frequently in combination with navigation systems and various app providers. And this has demonstrated that reduce massively the pressure on the roads, the 16 roads, and also in the neighborhood itself. There is also quite a lot of interest around incentivization, and now we can avoid travel altogether, completely shifting the way we travel and when we travel, and during the time of the day as well. So it's a way of moving away from traffic signaling, but moving ahead in the supply chain and how users behave, really.
And is that reflected in Europe as well? Are you seeing that
Definitely.
similar approach that our other panelists have outlined?
Yeah, and first I need to say, this is such a great combination of, deep tech and at one end and nudging on the other one, because we need to combine these different kinds of things as well. And due to data, thanks to data, we can do that now. We can nudge in the right direction. And I'd say that it's also about,
getting this data or the understanding of how people are moving and the need for that change to move in another path, another way, is something that is very common for many, many cities. Of course, they have the different concepts as a city, but when we look at them as a system, we see that there's a number of things that in traffic management, traffic analysis not least, it's something we really can build on to find these solutions that could really make a big change. So that is actually something that we are very much working with in terms of other missions for the EU, like the mission cities going climate neutral, in 2030. And we see from a city like Lund, where I was living, 40% of all the emissions came from transport and mobility. So we need to start there, and this is definitely something that can help us.
Fantastic. Laurence, I was going to come back to you because you mentioned a bit about how we're shifting away from just trying to get cars basically around the network. One of the things that's a big fundamental idea in traffic management is about mobility as a service. So I'm aware that we're probably a generalist audience in this. We're not at a transport show. Could you start off, because I'd task you with defining mobility as a service if you can, because I know that it's different for different people, and saying why you think it's important, or maybe if you don't, why not?
Yeah, I can try. As I say, it's different for different people, I think, and different levels of mobility of service have been defined. For me, it's all around simplicity and seamlessness at the customer end for travelling around, and typically that's expressed through integration of services across modes. So whether that's your taxi into your train, and often it's sort of simplified down to the ticketing level, but it's more than that. It's the sort of bringing together of different modes and connecting journeys so that it's more seamless for the user experience. I think that's. And unless anyone wants to add or disagree, I think that's typically how it's defined.
How do we feel about? I thought that was very good. Yeah.
So, in terms of how that happens, I mean, we live in a messy world, and there's no one sort of partner, even in somewhere like London where you have TfL who sort of operate the public transport. It's not the case in most of the other parts of the country, and even then, TfL don't sort of control the taxi fleet, and they sometimes try to. But sort of integrating that across the whole mobility system is difficult, and we've seen the likes of MAS Global, who are a Finnish company, but they did have some operations here in the UK. They went bust, filed for bankruptcy, I think, earlier this year. And I think they came up against those challenges of just getting buy-in from enough stakeholders. So it's difficult, but I think also you don't necessarily need one sort of big puppeteer at the top organising it all. I think as planners, it's our responsibility to make journeys seamless as a collective.
Fantastic. And Anders, did you want to come in there?
Very briefly, it's going back to that. I once was in the business of aviation and flights and stuff like that, so booking systems. I'm sorry, but I do not think we can manage this. The deep integration of all these systems is going to be, the efforts to do that is going to be too much. So I'm not super positive.
I think it's always good to have a bit of disagreement on a panel. Patrizia,
I'm going to provide a disagreement here.
Go ahead.
Because mobility as a service lives with the new mobility services that are actually the building blocks of mobility as a service. And we are running before walking here, because majority of the mobility as a service are not stable yet themselves. You can see that, for example, in the UK, you don't have many demand responsive transport that survives beyond the couple of years or the initial trials within certain area. It's missing the place-based approach and the cooperation between various organizations. MAS Global was operating in a completely centralized market because Helsinki is the public authority is coordinating all the public transport systems, and they moved in the UK where we got the opposite, completely decentralization of the transport systems. What we need is a stable business model with also local authorities and government taking a place in the interest, and the ability to share the data. So there is a big barrier around the data sharing, the data governance, and that we can use those data that we produce in the back office to provide a better service to the users. And from that point of view, the transport models provide a huge help in understanding what is the right business model that we need to implement and how many users you can convince to shift towards this mobility as a service provision, because it's moving away from the traditional fixed scheduled public transport.
So John, I'm going to come to you now as a local authority, as a London borough.
Well, we get the thick edge of the wedge of these changes. So a good example, something like Line Bikes or other providers. So what we've found is the human behaviour associated with it, because they don't own the asset. Actually, their behaviour with that asset is very different. So how responsible they are on the road while they're riding it, what they do when they get to the other end and where they leave it, and the general state of that asset deteriorates quite quickly. And the feeling of antisocial behaviour grows in the community, which then sort of like works against these agendas. So whilst we can look at a purist technical point of view of these transport hubs and modelling it in systems, that bit of human nature and how we behave as people always gets left out, and that's the bit I end up having to pick up the pieces for as someone who works in the public space. So we have to be mindful of that, and how actually the public infrastructure out there is not always ready for these type of technologies to come in, and we need to reshape and redesign how we do stuff in order to do that. And that means essentially with a road you've got to reduce the capacity for cars and take it out. And so that you can repurpose that space for other things, because the cake's not getting any bigger. You have to cut the slices differently, and I think that's something we have to think in the round when you're doing it.
And of course, I mean, speaking as a London borough, you know, a lot of people envy London for its integrated transport system. Do you think that actually, you know, when we're talking about mobility as a service, it's the model that the city has to be running it, has to sort of take the lead, or is it?
I think it's going to go that way anyway, generally because, you know, cars are getting more expensive, and and houses are getting more expensive. So actually, access to ownership of assets is different. So people are generally going to be service consumption based in the future. It's just how the market's going and being pushed. So I think we have to accept that. It's actually our ability to adapt is both socially and physically in the environment is where our challenge is, and there's a lot of cost to that, and a lot of carbon debt to pay as a consequence of that.
Yeah. Great. I want to slightly change tack here, because one of the other big issues in transport is the transition to electric or hydrogen, and obviously the government's got a big, well, in the UK, but all over the world, governments are looking to decarbonise their car fleet. How do we see this going? Obviously, there was the news a couple of weeks ago that there was a dip in the electric vehicle market in the UK. It's fair to say there's hydrogen is still, you know, preferred by quite a lot of freight operators. How do you see the debate evolving? Where are we going with this? And who wants to tackle that first? Patrizia, should I come to you?
We have seen that modeling the battery electric vehicles uptake, the way we travel is completely different. So you will not have enough battery electric vehicle to reach the target. So you need to introduce soft measure and invest in charging infrastructure, mobility hubs, in order so for people to understand that the battery electric vehicles could be an advantage for them. There is quite an attachment towards the vehicle itself as a status symbol rather than a means of traveling. And there is also quite a lot of mistrust in the ability to share the vehicle itself within other users, but also to use other type of alternative fuels. Hydrogen cars are coming as well. There is not enough information on how to store and produce hydrogen. But for example, for the freight operators, battery electric trucks are a no-no, because they need capability to move very high load freights. And at the moment, we don't have the clarity yet. So there are, for example, some countries that prefer to move towards hydrogen because their charging network is too far behind, and also because they're protecting the automotive sector as well. Because an hydrogen car is more complex in its system, whilst the battery electric vehicles are simpler, but because they're simpler, they're also easier to automate, which is another big part of the mobility sector, automated mobility.
Yes, well, which we haven't yet. Well, we can touch on, I think, if we... it's a whole different area, isn't it?
We could be here for 6 hours talking about
exactly. Laurence, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I'll just challenge a couple of those points. I mean, I think when it comes to hydrogen versus battery, I think ultimately the market is deciding, and it is going the way of the battery electric vehicle for the passenger car, for sure. Hydrogen vehicles aren't really coming; they're actually dying in the UK. So there's hardly any models. The Mirai, the Toyota Mirai, which was around, is not, and you can't actually sell them. So they're losing a lot of their value. For bigger trucks, yes, that has been a sort of a market for hydrogen. But again, there are options for electric vehicles, and there was a big project awarded recently that is Gridserver involved in eHGV fleets. So I think you will see that coming. The big barrier a few years ago was just the cost of batteries, which made it untenable for big freight vehicles. But those costs are coming down, and they are continuing to come down. And I think you will see that will mean that even for big trucks, electric vehicles are probably the most viable.
Fantastic. Anders, did you want to come in there?
Just on an overall, I think first of all, the hydrogen, yes. As well as it's a discussion on we need different kinds of models. We also need different kinds of fuelings, I guess, in terms of what kind of vehicle it is. Freight, you said, yes, maybe that could be for hydrogen. But then again, if we were to do hydrogen for passenger, private cars, then we would also need a total new other infrastructure again, build a new infrastructure again, complexity again. And but also going back to we need to be honest. The EVs are not going to save us. It's a good change, but in terms of a good example, no, it's a super bad example actually. It's that if we look at Oslo in Norway, Oslo with all their oil funding money, they put on congestion charges for diesel cars and similars, and there was a boom in the EVs. And now we have more cars on the streets again in the city of Oslo in terms of bigger SUVs that are electrical. And so going back to being not so cheap to buy these solutions as well, we see there is a lot of course, private financing that is growing this EV market, because I think you said something about it could be a thing of...
£100,000 to buy an SUV electric.
Yeah,
drive electric for 7 years.
That might be something that you can spend your money on if you have it. But if it's so good in the long run for our strive for this sustainable mobility, not so sure.
And
I was going to say, because we do have green fleets, or fleet to manage. So basically, from our point of view, vans and cars, they're all electric in the borough. Our problem does come into the more freight stuff. So to give you an example, our refuse fleet, we'd love to make that EV, but it's untenable. Mainly because if you look at the payload of the vehicle, it's about 6% of it is to the engine and the fuel in the diesel vehicle. It goes up to near 30% in EV. So that means we have to either get more vehicles or we've got to do more runs. All the diesel vehicles are double shifted with all the lifting and everything that's going on. So we actually need around about 1.8 to 2.4 times the fleet size. So we need another bigger depot, and then we need a little mini nuclear power station to charge it, because the power consumption for charging becomes really, really large. So there's a bit. I think we still need to be searching for other alternatives, whether that be synthetic fuels based or even on-demand hydrogen produced from water. So electrolysis water to make HHO, and retrofitting, because we do retrofitting strategies for buildings, but no one's really been thinking about a car, because there is a little bit of there's perfectly good car assets out there, and then to scrap them for an EV market. Well, they've still got life in them, and then you've got the carbon to make them in the first place, the carbon to destroy them, and then turn them into the carbon to turn them into something else. There's a little bit we have to think about that and the unintended consequences of some direction.
Laurence, I could see you wanting to come in. Go on.
I have quite a few opinions on this. So I've worked in this market a while, and I have seen it develop, and I've seen costs come down, and I've seen efficiencies improve. And I think the big thing to remember with electrification is the big likelihood is we are going to replace car ownership with car ownership. You can set aside the merits of that, as Anders pointed out, and ideally, in an ideal world, we would all move to public transport and be more active. But if we are replacing car ownership largely with car ownership, electrification will have the biggest impact on carbon emissions in the transport sector without fail. And I think the likes of hydrogen are largely a distraction, And if you walk around this hall and you see who is promoting hydrogen, you can probably work that out for yourself in terms of who is promoting hydrogen. It's those with the assets to pump gas across our country. So I think that's why I personally think electrification will be the way to go. It's much more efficient as a energy form, whereas hydrogen, to produce it cleanly, you have to start with electricity, lose about 70% of it in efficiency, converting it and distributing it. And so if you have loads of surplus green electricity, sure, go for hydrogen, but we're not at that stage, so we need to use all of the electricity as sort of well as we can.
I want to come to questions, but Patrizia, do you want to just quickly come in there, because I want to give you a right to respond. It's a really fascinating discussion, so thank you all. But
with battery electric vehicles, we got the problem that John mentioned is that we have a travel patterns and a load, and also a travel patterns that is stop and go, which majority of waste management vehicles can operate efficiently with the electric vehicle battery. And also the topography itself of an area is also extremely impacting the performance of the battery itself. Majority of hydrogen producer may be in the future also assets owners, but also big infrastructure owners like airports, ports, which have the ability and the land available to produce and stock hydrogen in their premises and bring back to the system energy as well. So there is a fluidity in how the energy is produced, stocked and used by other users. So in the future energy will not stay where it is produced, but will be distributed into the network. And it's true that passengers vehicles will probably go towards electric vehicles in this country, but there are other assets that will be used in order to decarbonize rail, ports and airports as well. We're thinking about a ship, battery-powered e-vessels are difficult at the moment, but we are developing the shore power infrastructure in order to provide those facilities and to provide energy also to those. So it's a small, long transition. I think you will have a short term with battery electric vehicles, but you need to consider that you still will have particulate matter, which is the emission that affect our health. So cities will certainly go towards that direction. But for example, in rural areas, and we go the outskirts of the cities, I'm looking at you, you will have the possibility to flex this ownership, because the people living in rural areas will not be able to afford or enter the market of a battery electric vehicle because of the initial cost that is required.
great. I'm keen to come to questions for the last 10 minutes. We'll carry on this debate, I'm sure, after the session. But thank you for everyone who's submitted the question. We've had a lot from Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous, so we'll go through some of those. But the first one was, why isn't technology being used to its full available potential in all transport modes? New micromobility apps, for example, versus our rail system. How do we change it? Who wants to tackle that? Why don't we use technology to its full potential across all transport? Laurence, do you want to go there?
I can try. I don't have any sort of stake or particular background in the technology that's used as a sort of a passenger information type systems, but from what I see, I guess it's where the money is and where the competition is, and at the public transport sector you've got this sort of the big operators, but at the micro-mobility you've got a lot of sort of start-up players that are competing with each other, and it's in their interest to sort of hook users in and get them on brand. For buses and trains, maybe that'll change with the coming sort of franchising that we're seeing, and maybe a sort of a GB rail that sort of some of the politicians are talking about.
Anders, I want to come to you because IT is involved in sort of supporting funding, and obviously there's, the UK is now re-involved in Horizon Europe.
Thank you.
Yes, which is very good news. Why aren't we converting some of those projects into technology, or do you think we are?
What the projects you're referring to?
Sorry, none in particular, but why? Just this question.
I think we take any. Okay. We invest in a lot of innovation projects. We do that, and it's from every level. That could be, very small projects. With the city for like 6 months, we try to look into something where we try to find a solution. That could be from we call it the Raptor project, but it could also be, of course, on the other. We are also Horizon funded, EIT Urban Mobility, so there could also be the Horizon project in the long run. But we really try to, and that is the thing about, our whole business that we're doing, trying to find these state-of-the-art solutions that we actually can turn into these solutions. But again, going also back to talking from anything from micromobility to shared automated vehicles, and then we have traditional public transport in between. That is what I think is something that we need to connect this. We need to add these new things onto this, and that is also very much of how we are focusing our funding in terms of startups and innovation projects.
Shall I come here? Because at the Catapult we have done many trials in the UK, specifically in looking at technologies, new type of technologies that range between connected autonomous vehicles, eVTOLs, hydrogen planes. The new technologies requires extensive trials because the market needs trust, and majority of the time this trust is not there when you got an SME that is coming with an innovative product and needs to create a niche in the market. So majority of the investment from the Department for Transport to Innovate UK to Horizon Europe for the very large trials across cities with various type of place, structure and users needs to be trialed extensively. Because if you trial that for 3-6 months is not enough to understand the benefits but also the drawbacks of the technology and how people accept that and what are the correct mechanism in order to generate revenue for these technology providers.
Exactly, and I note on that because it takes a lot of time. To of course develop these solutions that are really working, but in the end, John, someone needs to procure them as well, right?
Well, I was going to say it's not a question of why we're not using the technology. The tail should never wag the dog. Technology is there as a enabler for people to do what it is they need to do. And it's actually market choice and people's own behaviours that is actually the block. It's not the tech. So, I've come in from Hertfordshire today. I can use my phone, tap on the gate, get a train, get a tube, get a bus with my phone. Without any app. That's already integrated to some degree. But why am I going to move away from that into a app platform that I'm going to log into? Okay, that precludes me from using some of the bike vendors and things like that, but I'd have to download those apps. But actually, most of the movement I need to do sustainably is already covered, and I can use my bank card and tap it. So it's not the tech's job to push the market. It's to show the possibility, and it's for people to come to it. And that's how. Otherwise, you get the wrong
behaviours.
Wrong behaviours. Yeah.
I was going to just quickly come in with another question, sticking with you, John, because I think this one is most relevant to you. Although I dare say, I don't think you would have control over this. But someone's come in and asked, how do we shift people towards active travel and public transport, particularly at this point? Would reducing public transport fare prices in London make any change in car ownership?
No, it's not cost actually; it's reliability. So the big thing that affects public transport reliability is its capacity. So so we've got some bus routes on the network which they run every 2 minutes, and they're at capacity, so they don't even stop at some stops because they're full. So there's no more you can chuck on in order to do that. So there is in some places the demand outstrips public transport's ability to deliver the reliability. It's not the price point per se that's really driving it. So coming back to the modelling point of view, what we're actually working on quite actively is messing up the roads for cars and reducing their capacity and reducing their ability to move quickly and speeding it up for everyone else. So whether we say, okay, half the road's going to a bus lane and the cycle lane, cars, you've got to take this proportion. That's the process we're doing, so that the bus reliability increases, journey time increases, and then the movement is more likely because it's faster than the car. We get 1 million trips a day in the borough, and the majority of those are 2 miles. So as an average, getting them onto that other modes of transport is quite important. Some of our other problem is the bus networks don't actually go from the demand hubs. So it's very much, round the stations or round, they're either horizontal hubs or vertical, but they don't actually make a very good network for people that real people need to move in.
Great. Laurence, John?
Yeah, I would second that totally. On the public transport side, it's about reliability, and that in part is where data and modelling systems can come in to try and prioritise that reliability and make sure that buses and trains run on time and seamlessly. The other thing I'd say is traditionally as industry we've focused on the commute and the peaks. I think the pandemic has shown us that the peak can be flexible and the peak isn't so important. And actually, a lot of people's touch points with public transport isn't in the peaks. I mean, if you're a daily user of a train, you're sort of used to that sort of depressing lifestyle every morning getting on the train. No, I'm joking. But actually, it's the people that use trains and public transport and buses occasionally at weekends just as important, because they're your sort of captive market, and it's those people that actually we want to engage with and we want to give them a good experience. So for engineering works at weekends where they get disrupted, that's not actually necessarily a good thing.
Thanks, Laurence. Just to try and get through, I think we've got time for maybe one more question before I ask sort of our closing question today. Next up is kind of what is the most impactful things we can do to incentivise traffic reduction? Well, I think we've talked a lot about this in terms of getting people onto public transport, incentivising sort of right behaviours. And is there anything else we can do?
Oh, very short on that. I think it's going back to how we work as people, or function as people. Sorry, I think it's also about what do we if we try to remove something. What do we provide instead? What is the other alternative value that we can bring to people, saying that, hey, I take away your car. From tomorrow you cannot drive your personal car anymore. So what do I get instead? Can we start to look into other kinds of shared values, going back to shared values? I mean, removing a street and we would have some more public space. Perhaps, could that be something? I think we need to replace that what we are removing with something that is also very intriguing. Better. This has to be better, yeah.
I think as well we can target our infrastructure and target how we sort of model things and look at things to be more specific rather than looking at the general. I mean, for active travel, obviously infrastructure and bike lanes are important, but they're more important to your sort of keen existing cyclists, whereas a lot of the data that we can now look at is more disaggregate, and we can see actually if we want to assist sort of older people or women, particularly into active travel, then other aspects are just as crucial, such as safety and perception of safety. Yeah. So it's not all about sort of purely infrastructure, it's actually what can we do around that.
100%.
I think some of the other point is a lot of the infrastructure we're building now is transient. So, you know, the reason why we're putting cycle lanes out there is actually to reduce the capacity for cars, to engender then the cyclists, and then at some point we'll take that away and integrate it more in back to bring the pedestrians back into the fold. So you kind of have to build like Lego blocks and get to a place. But ultimately, you know, you don't want to be taking stuff away from people per se. You just want to make the best choice, the path of least resistance for people, so they choose it actively, rather than being forced to. Because when you start to force a cohort of people into it, you get a lot of resistance, and especially in the political world, then the politicians will back off the policies. Yeah. So that's you know, it's really fundamental. It has to be people have to choose to get there and want to do it.
Yeah. And Patrizia, do you want to comment there?
I will just add, because we're talking about active travel, we're referring to cyclists, but majority of the time active travel is just walking. We are restricting the capacity for cars, but we are not building safe place to walk. Majority of in urban areas, maybe it's more standardized. You've got lots of shared mobility, shared spaces here in London, but outside London, these have been not that successful at all. Some of the towns that we got just in the outskirts of the counties around London, for example, they don't have walking paths. You have new developments, new housing builds with probably a connection with the public transport, but you don't have a way to walk down the town centre. So there is this restricting the cars but providing extra infrastructure for people to walk and cycle safely at the right time. Thinking about Catapult Connected Places based in Milton Keynes, we got the Redways, where we got quite a lot of walking space, which is well lit, where people feel comfortable, especially families. So when something that we have not touched yet is how to allow the young generations to see the positive of public transport. My son doesn't think about driving a car, he wants to jump on a bus or on a metro. And this is the way he's been educated. So we need to look at how the young families will perceive that. If we restrict the capacity of public transport over the weekend, we produce the opposite effect. It's bad marketing, negative marketing for the public transport network.
I agree. So we get about 1 million trips a day by car in the borough, but probably foot trips are nearer the 10 million a day. So that disproportion between the road network is always, it's a public highway for cars, is a real ingrained thing in British culture. But actually, the biggest user of that network is pedestrians by a long way, and always has been, especially in urban areas.
And we now have the capability to capture those data of people walking and cycling, and to put that into a transport model and integrated completely all the modes of transport, whilst before we had several siloed models which were looking at just car, just public transport. Active travel was probably not even mentioned, and not even the cycling lanes were even represented.
I've had many arguments with modelers over this.
So thank you very much for that. Unfortunately, I mean, we're out, sorry, Laurence, we're out of time. We'll continue the conversation, I'm sure, afterwards. And if you want to talk to our panellists, please do. I've got to finish on one thing, which is Innovation Zero is asking all panels to ask the question, if you had a call to action or a specific request that you wanted to do to have a meaningful impact on kind of decarbonisation, in one short line, what would it be? So, Anders, if I start with you.
Do you hear me? Sorry, I think, again, I would really like to start with a, what shall I call it? I would like to see a bigger sense of urgency from the politicians. We need to finance this. We need to make sure that we invest in this. But then again, going back to the people, us the people, citizens, we also need to invest in more nudging, maybe, in terms of making us all being aware that we are actually being part of causing this situation, and we are not going towards a change together. We need to do it together.
John.
Oh, for me, it's the nudging piece. So, my challenge to all of you would be, think about your journey you're going to make when you get up in the morning tomorrow, and if you can switch one of those from car to something active, do it. And if everyone does that, the difference would be enormous. So it's just being conscious about the impact of what you're doing. It's like chucking a rock in the pond, ripple. Someone's going to get wet shoes somewhere down the line. It's not necessarily you. So once you're aware that your actions on the planet have a consequence to somebody else, and you can do something about it, that will make the biggest change.
Laurence?
I would also add to that and just say that I suspect a lot of you here are maybe leaders amongst your professional circles or your friendship circles. So be a leader, go out and show that travelling sustainable is possible. Tell people about the time you got the Eurostar. But I was just going to say, because I'm a data guy, also just do an audit. Go and tally up all of your carbon emissions from the year, and I think there's plenty of app-type companies that are exhibiting here, and see where you are spending your carbon budget, and see how you can improve that. You're not going to slash it in half overnight, but you can make real changes. Transport is one of those, but heating and diet are others. So I'd go and say, tally up your carbon budget, however roughly, and just see where you can move year on year from that.
And last but not least, Patrizia.
For me, it's make it place-based, because each place is different. They will have different infrastructure, services available, and people will got different priorities as well. So what works in London is not 100% that is going to work outside London or in a rural areas. So we need to consider the full mix and not to create one formula for everybody.
Fantastic.
I mean, you say in London, I mean, just north and south of Hammersmith, there's fundamental difference in the place.
Oh, yes, London is big.
So,
Yes.
yeah.
Well, on that note, I just want to say a massive thank you to our panel. I thought that was really fascinating, and actually also some of these panels you don't get much disagreement, but we had lots here in terms of MAS, in terms of EVs and hydrogen, which is fantastic. It's always good to have a debate. So if you can show our thanks in the usual way and give our panel a round of applause, please.
Thank you.